Resident Evil is one of the most important games that spawned one of the biggest franchises and created some of the best games of all time. It's such a known brand, I'm questioning the necessity of this paragraph for context. Whether it's through the hilarious films, pachinko machines, canonized stage plays, or just the games themselves, it's a property almost universally recognized, even for non-horror fans. Its fan base retreated to an innovative debut, expanded into experimental sequels, next-gen spin-off, prequel, remake, and reinvention, whose influence is still felt to this day. Yet Resident Evil 4 is often labeled as the game that killed this franchise, and that's because unlike the successors to Capcom's PlayStation Classic, innovations made in the 360 and PS3 era felt less like genuine iterations and more following trends, culminating in 2012's Resident Evil 6. A game whose critical reception inadequately conveys the metric megaton of criticism and frustration it received, and rightfully so. Resident Evil 6 embodies the 7th console generation with muted hallways, quick-time events, cover systems, turret sections, vehicle chases, explosive set pieces, co-op, vapid DLC, and world-ending stakes. All that's missing is a dubstep remix, and not one piece enhances the franchise's atmospheric roots. Nor does their execution outclass the bar set by their contemporaries, or even those that preceded them. All of which stems from Capcom's goal of creating the ultimate horror entertainment while also believing the survival horror market was too small for Resident Evil. It's easy to empathize with fans who begin Leon's campaign nostalgic for the character's first day on the job, or investigating a Spanish cult, only to be greeted with an explosion, quick-time event, and more explosions. And this is subtle compared to Chris or Jake's campaigns that feature everything from SSX3's top peak to friggin' fighter jets. Even judging the menus, button prompts, and level progression, this game's got the consistency of Comcast. You cannot pause. Multiple keys utilize conflicting tasks. Jerry! And I swear that each of the 600 employees developing this game made their own door with its own method and order of use. Whether you open or roundhouse them and fade into a cutscene before or after it's open was seemingly decided by whatever Capcom threw at the board that morning. This game is most unequivocally bad. So why is it my most played game in the series, featured on Steam Curation, and on my old channel's top 5 games of the year list? Well, everything said to this point has been in the context most consumers going into Resident Evil 6 had in 2012, but they're not my own. To the horror of many, my introduction to Resident Evil was its 5th installment being heavily discounted on Steam, where a buddy and I took the $5 plunge and proceeded to have one of the best co-op experiences of our lives, and for all the wrong reasons. This game is remarkably stupid with its flashback, bullet time, teleporting, button spamming, boulder punching, sunglass throwing, tentacle-infested family reunion tale that takes itself completely seriously, which to us just made it adorably entertaining. I've played hilariously bad games and obscenely over-the-top games before, but Resident Evil 5's mixture of moronic storytelling with high production values and the strong gameplay of Resident Evil 4 made for a unique experience that had us salivating for Resident Evil 6's PC port, in spite of all the negative press, and it only exceeded expectations. This game made Resident Evil 5 look like a documentary, and the absurdity now infected so much more than cutscenes.
Oh, breaching? What? What?
Excuse me, can I get a comment, please? Excuse me.
What?
That baffling laughter is something you'll get used to while playing because moments like these are in almost every subchapter. Around each corner, there's the possibility for you to experience something inconsequently dumb.
Come on, let's get some answers. Shit, it's locked.
Normally in games this interrupts the flow, but Resident Evil 6's cliches, confusion, and chaos is the flow. These little moments would disrupt a great game like Resident Evil 4, but because 6 is a stupid game, they become one of the core pillars accompanied by cutscenes and gameplay. By now, Resident Evil's established a pattern. It draws attention with innovative gameplay, capturing the hearts of millions, but gets increasingly criticized by detractors over time. Historically, the tank controls became enough for some players to write off entire games, and with third-person shooters establishing their dominance in the 7th generation, Capcom's restricted movement and item management seemed archaic compared to the likes of Uncharted, Gears of War, and Dead Space, especially as 2 of those games used Resident Evil in their elevator pitch. So Resident Evil 6 is the attempt to address those criticisms with many elements that are surprisingly unique for the time. giving players an array of melee and mobility moves when most of its genre focused purely on shooting, or made acrobatics and melee combat separate from gunfights. But while these additions by Capcom are commendable, what's meant to crank Resident Evil's intensity up to 11 only increases its insanity, making itself evident in co-op, most obviously with melee combat.
I'm help. I got you.
Fucking hell. God, I have thighs like you wouldn't believe, man. What's meant to evolve the melee attack from clunky knife fights into an MMA brawl turns this game into a slapstick comedy. Your hardened career soldiers will be falcon-punching teammates, government agents will be kicked in the ass for taking too long to open doors, and one failed hit will turn your mercenary into a human bobsleigh. Oh, fuck you! Fuck you! And this game's comedy is assisted by the environments you explore. Levels in this game are achingly cramped, which perhaps wouldn't be noticeable if they then weren't packed with explosive scripted jumps and boxes containing valuable items. As a result, even those attempting to play this like a serious Resident Evil game are likely to find themselves bumping, kicking, or even trapping each other.
Hey, what? I'm stuck in the corner. Stuck in the corner. Get the fuck out of the way.
It'd been years since I last touched this game, but despite playing with new people and a new generation with a new outlook on Resident Evil itself, the sheer hilarity of playing it was still there. The game's stupidity is such a consistency, even messing with objects in an empty room was enough to entertain. Look at my character's height and then that fire extinguisher.
Jesus.
But when it comes to total absurdity, the ultimate pillar that holds this game together are the cutscenes. It's got every cinematic cliche in the book, from goons with Stormtrooper syndrome, hilarious expendable characters, flashbacks that are even more jarring than Resi 5, and lines like this. The opening alone is one of the game's highlights. Leon and Helena jump onto a helicopter whose pilot dies. No explanation, he's just dead now. So Leon takes control of aerial transport and is talented enough to gun down the former pilot that Helena prevented from falling out because... Leon then hits a building, narrowly misses a high-speed train, spins into a skyscraper, slides through an entire office, collides into a media tower, falls several feet onto a glass ceiling, only for the tower itself to collapse on top of them.
Jesus.
And the cherry on top of this sundae is that there's not a hint of irony. It's not like later Fast and the Furious films where action scenes have an air of self-awareness. It's so much more like that train scene in COD World War II. Capcom use all of their team's immense production talent in animation, lighting, editing, and modeling, all to make moments that so effectively go against their own goals of creating tension. It's amazing to watch and play. Even when the interactivity is accomplished by these horrendously dated QTEs, its designs still lead to their own hilarious interludes.
Nice. He goes in with you.
And you just
standing there.
There's a slew of great co-op games for people to play. Vermintide, Warframe, Saints Row, and so much more, but it's these moments of pure joy that separate Resident Evil 6 from the rest. It's exactly like Cheese Fest that you grab buddies to laugh at the screen with, only you get to play it. And I think that's beautiful. I'm not without empathy to series fans who wanted this game to be something else, especially as it certainly had the resources, budget, and talent to do so successfully, just not the direction or management. And constant references to the past sure didn't help. But the silver lining is, unlike so many franchises that are shelved once their peak isn't maintained, Resident Evil has come back. Again. All the reasonable fears that the franchise would continue down the road Resident Evil 5 and 6 paved haven't come to fruition, even before Resident Evil 7. In my earlier days of writing crappy editorials for websites, Revelations 2 was one of the most pleasant surprises I had. It's got so much in common with Resident Evil 6 that its optional raid mode reuses levels from that game, but retools everything to create a genuinely atmospheric, intense experience that effectively channels Resident Evil 4's qualities. Not to mention the usual campy plotline was replaced with a fairly gripping story of Claire Redfield and friend Moira Burton being trapped on a mysterious island while Burton's father searches for them 6 months later. It's still got the hammy voice acting this franchise has long since established for itself, but that made its genuinely intriguing or emotional scenes that much more memorable. Within just a few years, Capcom were not only bringing Resident Evil back to its roots, but even improving certain aspects, and without abandoning all of the resources developed for the 6th game. The irony is, with Revelations 2, the highly acclaimed Resident Evil 7, and extremely promising Resident Evil 2 remake, the game seen as a pandering generic mess has retroactively become one of the most unique games in the series. Nothing else in the franchise plays or presents itself like Resident Evil 6 does. 5 entertains, but not nearly to this degree. Revelations 2 has some of its mechanics, but doesn't set up a sandbox where friends repeatedly kick each other, and 4 is too self-aware to laugh at in the same manner. Now that there's a slew of great Resident Evil games being released and enough time's passed to bring prices down, Resident Evil 6's nonsensical action has only become easier to appreciate. And I highly recommend anyone who hasn't experienced this game to grab a friend and check it out. I've intentionally left clips out of this video as what you've seen here is only scratching the surface of what it has to offer. There's a wealth of content here, with the co-op campaigns taking well over a dozen hours to finish, and the Mercenaries mode, whose No Mercy variant on PC and 8th gen consoles could easily justify the price tag alone. In a sort of tragic way, it best demonstrates Resident Evil 6's combat system. The dozens of enemies on screen at once force you to effectively time melee attacks, explosives within the environment and held by your character, and the arena-style environments force you to be constantly on the move, all the while prioritizing enemies on the fly, making for some intense matches. The cluttered controls can lead to characters performing moves you didn't want, and there's some straight up bullshit with enemy placement, but they're easy to forget upon roundhouse kicking an entire horde. Plus, even this mode has a good chunk of content, with multiple levels, characters, unlockables, and co-op support. Though it should be said, even in the context of enjoying this game as the roller coaster it is, there are points when the ride derails. In particular, the key and data hunts are the lowest points in each campaign. Walking through a mini maze of samey corridors looking for 3 pieces to open one door hurts the pacing this game normally has, that being equivalent to planting a boulder firmly on the accelerator. That's also why at times it can be exhausting to play through. This game's so jam-packed with set pieces, story, and slapstick comedy that it can all start to blur together without taking breaks. But that unrelenting experience is why I love Resident Evil 6. I'm not sure if the developers will be pleased to hear their game being enjoyed for how much it makes me laugh rather than scream, but like a Neil Breen film, I wouldn't want Capcom to have made Resident Evil 6 any other way. The Enduring Studio has been doing phenomenal work with the Resident Evil license as of late, and if one preposterous game is what it took to happen, then I think even fans would agree it was worth the laughs. It's said that one person's trash is another one's treasure, and I can't personally think of a better example than Resident Evil 6.
When you start to play Resident Evil 6, you'll hammer the buttons and wiggle the sticks to punch or to shoot.
Would you prefer a canvas bag or a falsely advertised product from a AAA games company? Raycevick, bringing you relevant questions on the hour. When are you going to play a good video game that starts with dark and ends with wood? When is the Halo Wars Years Later video? Why are you such a fucking scrungus? Well, that's just too many questions for me to answer, Sparky. What's your favorite piece of pop culture from 2018? I'll tell you in 2038. What was your favorite meme of 2018? Bongo Cat, for being tolerable.
Let's go!
When's the video on Ride to Hell Retribution coming out, and do you plan on explaining why it's your favorite video game of all time? How long do you need to play a game to know it is or isn't for you? Varies greatly, but when sound effects are to my disliking, that's the fastest way to make me quit. I gave Time Shift about 15 minutes for that reason. You have to play Ride to Hell Retribution to completion or chop off one of your limbs. What limb do you chop off? My arm, so I can use it to beat the crap out of you for asking such a dumb question. Why don't we ever go out anymore? Are you seeing another woman? No, I'm cutting off limbs, like a normal person.
Jerk it out.